Hello there, I'm Christy Glasgow doing the Takesis Queen of Dragons cosplay in the All Stars cosplay competition, and this is my first check-in video. So, I see that some of the other cosplayers were smart and started buying things and doing research before the official start date. So I feel like I'm doing a bit of catch up. I had chosen my costume but hadn't done all the research that I probably should have at that time. So I've been furiously trying to do all the sort of research and trying to gather materials and things like that. So the first thing that I did, I thought I would start on a solid object, something that I can sort of really get my teeth into, which is her staff, because that'll help me get the scale of her costume. So basically scaled up her staff, and judging by my height, doing it in scale, to me it's going to be 2.2 meters tall, and you know, knowing the Armageddon sort of prop rules, props have to be 2 meters or shorter. So that introduces an interesting sort of dilemma for myself. So I'm going to make essentially two versions of this to get around that. I'm going to make the staff in its true length, so I can take photos at home because I can do that. And then I'm going to basically have to have a section that comes off and have a shorter section, so it's under the sort of rule length for Armageddon. So I've got to figure out how I'm going to break this down to, you know, make it convention safe. So I've kind of sort of focused on the bottom part here, because I figured that this kind of serpentine design here is going to be too hard to chop in half. So there is like a break point here where we get these small little segments, and I'm probably going to make a second version of this that will connect onto the staff so that I can make a shorter version. So that's that problem sorted. Next was to, you know, actually sort of get a sense of the whole size. So I basically printed it out in like a giant jigsaw, sort of like that, and made a big version. I've got photos in my file, so I could I've made a big life-size printout of this so I can test a few techniques. I'm going to start with, you know, kind of the tricky part up here. And in the past, I have attempted a prop of this scale. Many years ago, I tried my hand at making a prop sword for a fantasy costume, which never really eventuated, but I did learn a few things on that. I'm definitely going to do it better this time. So I had used a sort of a wooden base, and had used sort of plastic and builder's bog to kind of build it up. I might try something like that this time. I'm also going to have a look at basically making a cardboard mock-up and seeing maybe how potentially useful I could do it with cardboard, paper mache, and sort of paper clay. Go like a lightweight route. I might play around with some expanding foam, or else just have to get into a slightly more sort of hardcore sculpting materials. So I'm going to start at the cheaper and lightest version and sort of go up if I fail. So I've got a few bits of that. I'm still not 100% set on what the core of the staff will be. I've got a few lengths and sort of different widths of wood and dowel and stuff like that. Plastic pipe, I'm not exactly sure, because I still need to decide how I'm going to do that connecting point, and that may make the decision for me as to what material I'm going to use. You know, hose connector pipes, you know, like the sort of twist and tension that you get on like the big long feather dusters and things like that, you know, to make them really long and extend. I might do something like that. So I'm going to have to look around and find some supplies on that front. So I've got a few supplies hanging around. I've got some paper clay that I'm going to start experimenting with. And then, of course, one of the other big components here is digging around patterns. I was turning the house upside down, trying to find a specific pattern that I have used in the past that I really like, because seeing how much armor components here, I want to start with a simple bodysuit. There's not much fabric sort of visible here. She's mostly covered in sort of armor and scales. The fabric components are mostly her cape and the sort of skirt section that's hanging here. So I'm going to use my experience of wearing stormtrooper armor to help me sort of use a similar technique here. I'm going to have an undersuit, so I'm going to basically be building a bodysuit, and then I'm going to be finding a complicated rigging system for mounting all of these armor pieces to sort of like a wearable harness. So I've got lengths of a black sort of polyester nylon webbing that I have used to rig stormtrooper armor. I've also got black elastic for around areas where you need a little bit of give. Particularly around the abdomen, so you've still got some movement so that those harnesses can flex, and then a whole lot of buckles, because I don't want to dome or attach any of the armor plates directly onto the bodysuit. I think I need the wiggle room to be able to adjust it when I put on, to make sure that all of those individual plates sit, because yes, I learned a lot wearing stormtrooper armor about that. A few other things I'm sort of working through, trying to figure out, because there are, here's my reference pictures, there are technically two main references that I'm using for this costume. I can pick up the other one. This is the original art, and this is the 3D render that they used for the mini. So there are a few differences here, two minor ones that originally sort of jump up to me. She's not wearing lipstick in this, and she's wearing black lipstick here, and I'm not sure which version I'm going to go for. My brain wants to go more towards the original art, because there are some sort of logistical issues with making something a physical 3D small object. Namely her hair in this one. She has really long hair that you can see is away from the body. That's really hard to do in mini form. So on this version, her hair is close to the body and only goes down to about her waist. So I would really like to do it like this. I think it looks dramatic, but I understand, especially when you have a look at the sort of a high-res picture of the actual mini, you can see that it is fairly small. And also one of the other things was basically the diameter of her staff. It's very thin here at the bottom and very wide here, because this is actually, this mini's only like, what, an inch or two tall. They can't make it that thin. It would be, you know, needle diameter. So I'm going to have to sort of figure that out. So one of the other components that I'm sort of working on deciding is basically the fabrics I'm going to be using. I was, you know, going to Spotlight, as I'm sure many of us have been doing recently, because I really want to get the dramatic effect of this cape. I think that that's going to be a crucial part of it. You can kind of see the cape slightly better on the back of the mini. It looks fabulous, it's draping, but she's Queen of Dragons, so I kind of want to have a little bit of a leather look to her armor. So I would love to use pleather for the cape, but the pleather that I really liked at Spotlight is $40 a meter. So I'm going to be playing around with some of the fabrics that I've got on hand, a really sort of heavy satin, a couple of other different bits and pieces, because I figure I can make a few mock-ups and figure out if I really, really do want pleather before jumping into that kind of cost. I think it would look amazing. The other thing that I want to figure out is, because this is all sort of artwork, I've got a little bit of leeway as to the sort of texture on the armor plates. I don't know if this will be sort of like highly polished and painted, or whether I want to cover the plates with a pleather fabric and then sort of paint over them to give it a real leathery dragon appearance, which seriously ups the cost, but it kind of depends on how well. I'm also a bit worried about possible rubbing between the armor plates, whether that will just eventually carve into pleather and just make it just an awful mess. I want to be able to wear and love this for many years to come. And also going backwards and forwards before, you know, I'm trying to do as much of the planning before I whip out my credit card here. I want to use wefts rather than a full wig. I think that this headpiece is going to be best if it is as tight fitting as I can, and I don't really want to be wearing a wig underneath. I think that that is going to affect how well I can get this to fit. So I want to use sort of wefts that I can probably either Velcro or take out in some way, so it doesn't just become really tangled and gross, especially if I'm dealing with hair that's long. So I'm going to be looking at a couple of places to source those from. And also just digging through. I swear, whenever you'd go to find something, that's when it hides from you in the house. So I was tearing the house upside down to find some specific patterns as well as the bodysuit pattern. I am toying with the idea of, I know I keep referencing this picture, there's a lot of armor over her abdomen, and my gut is telling me that I might want to make a sort of a more sturdy bodice to keep my sort of posture up, so I'm not likely to sort of slouch and crunch armor onto itself. That also might help just give a very defined circumference to sort of wear the armor over the top. But I've never made corsets before, so I nearly got the nerve to work on one some years ago. I bought a bunch of patterns and that was about as far as I got. I kind of chickened out, so I'm going to see whether I am brave enough to attempt that this time. At least it's not visible. If it really looks ugly, it's going to be underneath armor. I just need to make it black so it hides into the background. One of the other pieces that I was looking at was the scales that go down at the front and the sides of the skirt. You can kind of see it here. Kind of classic sort of chainmail-esque. It's kind of a dragon scale type that I've seen on costumes before. I know that you can buy metal versions. I know that some people go the very ingenious route and use plastic spoons. So I've got a bunch of plastic spoons because I guess the third option is to make each scale myself. And considering that we've got it all the way down the front and then these side panels, you can kind of see it just under the skirt. I haven't even counted how many petals I would need, or scales. So I don't really want to have to hand make them. I know that the point of this contest is to hand make them, but you know, I also just want it to look good. And I still think using plastic spoons would be fairly crafty. And I thought I had gold paint to do some tests, but I seem to have misplaced it. So that would be one of the negative things that's been going for me, thinking I had a bunch of things on hand so I could get started and doing some of these tests, turning the house upside down, and can't find them. Unfortunately, as I'm sure a few of you experienced, we were flooded during the Auckland floods. So stuff in my house is like not where I thought it was. So I've been digging around trying to find where all of that stuff got put in a hurry when we're trying to get things out of the water. And I just can't find it. So the other thing that I'm like really excited, I love the research part of costuming. I do a lot of costume sort of building in my head. I feel like, you know, Minority Report or like Iron Man, you know, where you're sort of like moving things around in space around your head. I sort of plan things out like that. And I've been doing so much sort of like seeing it as a 3D jigsaw in my head, trying to figure out the steps. And I think, what would this go, and that sort of stuff. And so on top of not being able to find the things that I thought I owned, my husband and I are going in about 4 or 5 days. We're going to an international conference in London to give 2 presentations. So that has been taking a lot of stress doing this because it's, you know, in front of a lot of people. We've got, you know, quite lengthy presentations to build, you know, and write script and all that kind of stuff. So that's been sort of like another mental hurdle that I've got this kind of big sort of deadline coming up in about 4 or 5 days. So that one's been a bit of a stress. And of course, as with international travel, I couldn't really be jumping in and buying $40 a meter fabric just yet. Once we get back from the trip, everything will be a little bit more relaxed and I can give this my undivided attention. I've got a sketchbook that I've been really trying to sort of just scratch out ideas and go through, just basically listing all the different techniques that I need to sort out, because I haven't exactly decided what I'm going to make this red gem out of, because there's also a few smaller ones in her sort of headpiece there as well. And yeah, Still sorting out a few of those things. I've got a fairly lengthy plane ride to London and back, so to be sure I'm going to have my sketchbook with me, and I'm going to be trying to figure this all out while I've got nothing else to do. But I'm very, very excited. I know that the other cosplayers in this fabulous competition are probably a lot more further ahead than I am. But I am feeling positive despite a few setbacks, and I'm very, very excited to start working on that staff as soon as I get back. Honestly, I sort of underestimated it. I thought it was going to be smaller than this, and seeing it sort of laid out in a big 3D jigsaw puzzle, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So I've got a lot of sculpting work to get started on with this. Gonna start with the cardboard template and see how well I can work out, and get the feeling I'm probably going to have to use something more rigid for the long spikes so that they don't flap. And I'm going to have to very shortly figure out what I'm going to use for the sort of red gem in the center of the staff there. I'm not 100% sure. I get the feeling I'm going to have to make something, and I'm not sure what material is going to be best for that, whether I want it to be sort of like an hollow orb or just a solid red ball that I can paint in an interesting way to kind of get an interesting sort of like, you know, is it more a ruby or is it kind of like a magical sort of orb? Because it's a drawing, so I've got leeway there a little bit. I did kind of grab some black lipstick because, you know, any excuse to buy makeup is fun, just in case I decide that I'm going to go the black lipstick route of the mini rather than the original artwork. And I've also got some gloves. That's one of the few things that I did actually buy so far. I don't know, she's got, you know, gloves here. I have made gloves like that before for a couple of different costumes, but because I want it to be pleather, I don't know, I kind of wanted to have some gloves as backup in case I completely fail on that one. So I've just got some gloves that I can adapt, because we're going to have some bits and pieces glued all over them. In terms of, she's got some sort of like armor on her fingers and stuff like that in these pictures. They sort of look like little gold long fingernails or sort of hand armor and stuff like that. So I've got pleather gloves to play around with in the meanwhile, just so I've got something to play with. Working out how to do the armor over the fingers. I do want to make the gloves myself, but I've got something to work with before I start buying all this expensive fabric. Because yeah, I mean, I'm short, but this is still a fair amount of fabric to go out that far. The other thing that I've got is a couple of skirt patterns, because I just want to play around with getting the shape of this, because the armor plates trail quite a way behind her. So I feel like I'm going to need a bit of a fabric base. I don't know if I'm going to have these literally attached to it, but I need at least a fabric base to put some sort of webbing structure over so that I can attach these. I don't really want it sort of looking like a fishing net of like lines and strapping and then having all these domed on the top. I want it to sort of look like a flowy skirt with these wonderful plates attached to it. So I'm going to play around with some, try and get a certain level of fullness, but because she's got sort of pants on, there's no like hoop skirter underneath to this, so I'm going to have some interesting times trying to get these to lay out like that. And yeah, got a few ideas for how to do the other bits and pieces. But I'm trying not to sort of mentally get overwhelmed, so I'm just picking out the pieces that I know I can start with straight away, while my brain sort of digests and works on sort of the mental jigsaw of the rest of these pieces so far. So I've got photos in my drive of like the bits and pieces that I've put together, and what I've sort of been working on so far. When I get back from London, then it is all go, and that's when I can really start getting out there. I've got a stack of black, just basic cotton fabric and some old black fabric, stretch, random lycras that I'm going to be doing some mock-ups with the patterns and things like that, just as a starting point so that I can start doing alterations and figuring out the way that I want the skirts. And there's also that front panel behind the sort of the gold scales as well. That it's not too complicated to pattern. But yeah, the sculpting components I'm still trying to sort of figure out, because the more I look at it, the more this is just an awful amount of armor and not as much sewing, but my brain is sort of gravitating towards the sewing as the starting point here. So I am eagerly awaiting when I can actually start sewing on this. I know that everyone that was clever and bought patterns and fabrics before the start date is probably very excitedly going to be showing off a lot of mock-ups, and I'm here talking about what I've been researching so far. But yeah, life had other plans for me this month. I did not start out this month thinking I would be going to London and doing some presentations, but this has just decided to be thrown into my lap. It's a very exciting opportunity, but it has kind of sidetracked me a bit this month. So very sorry I don't have more to show you, but I'm very excited for next month. I'm with some Armageddon conventions later in the month. Certainly got me in the cosplay mind track. Very keen to get starting and actually have a staff to show you guys next month. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all the wonderful progress that the other cosplayers have done so far.